Good afternoon, everybody. I was hoping to sit on the edge of the table. My staff always gave me a hard time for doing that, but it says something about the informality with which I hope we approach today. This isn't a meeting from the standpoint of who talks first and who talks second and that kind of thing. It's an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little bit better, share some common visions and ideas for our town, based around a video that we're going to watch. And rather than just starting and saying, well, let's all talk, I think sometimes it's a little easier when we have an opportunity to have some common information for us to react to. So we will be watching a video in a few minutes, and then we'll open it back up to discussion from everyone. I will tell you this, if I'm here in this particular spot, I'm going to be looking for those of you who haven't raised your hand and haven't spoken, because there are 3 or 4 of us, me included, who would tend to talk the entire time if we had that opportunity. And that doesn't mean that we are the only ones that have the great ideas. Some of the best ideas come from the quietest minds out there. And so, if I'm here kind of trying to keep things moving along, I may look at you and ask you what's on your mind, and that's not meant to make you feel uncomfortable. It's meant to give you that open door so that you can share with us some of the things that you're thinking. I want to thank a couple people before we start this. I want to thank city staff, those of us who get an opportunity to work with them on a weekly, monthly, daily basis. Appreciate everything they do. Sometimes we come up with ideas and they make them happen. So I want to thank them for that. I also want to thank the members of the City Commission who are here. They didn't camp out here last night, but they very well could have. They spent a long meeting last night, and they're here again today, and so I appreciate that. Let me take a second for the record, I guess, if that's what it's going to be, to introduce those elected officials and also those who serve on the Planning Commission. There's Mayor Aaron Householder. Welcome, Mayor. Vice Mayor John Blanchard. See if I can be sure I have this right here. Didn't see, no, I don't see. Mrs. Crawford, Kay Crawford. Randall Harding. I think those are the members of the commission who are here at this particular time. And then I'd like to introduce those members of the Planning Commission who are here. We have Carl Ryan, Owen Freiberger. Let's stick your hand up a little bit at least so that people can kind of get an idea you're here. David Norland, Kurt Cusack, and Barbara Good. And did I see Joanne? There you are. Joan, excuse me. See, I told somebody beforehand, Joan and Joanne those are terrible names, although she's a lovely person, and I never know which way to say it, and I apologize for that very much. Wally Story. And have I missed anyone else? Yeah, I was going to mention her because I wanted to use her as an example. Again, we always are concerned that we get volunteers to serve on some of the commissions and so forth. And we have a student member, Morgan Ayotte, and she's a shining example of the young people in our community who, given the opportunity, will become volunteers for us and will make a difference for us in the future. So welcome all of you, and I welcome all the rest of you who came as well. I hope this is beneficial, about an hour and 45 minutes. We are going to run this like a classroom to the extent that when 5 o'clock comes, we're done. If we finish before then, fine, but we are going to say the bell rings at that time, and I know I sat in the back of Algebra 1 class as a freshman in high school, and that bell never stopped ringing before I made it to the door, and that isn't because I hated algebra, it's just that's when it was supposed to be over. So I do want to let you know that you didn't sign up for a 3-hour tour that turned into a marathon, all right? Okay. With that, let me just say a little bit about Ed McMahon. How many of you know Ed McMahon, or have at least heard the name? And yeah, and this particular individual, there's another Ed McMahon out there, and that's not him. But Ed McMahon is a developer, I would say, as much as anything else. He's a senior resident fellow at the Urban Land Institute in Washington. He does a lot with sustainable development. I had a very strange opportunity to see him in 2011, and I didn't really know who he was, and his message did not resonate as well as it should have because I was working for another organization at the time, and it didn't have the same impact as it had then. I got reintroduced to him by John Blanchard a month ago as we were talking, and so I want to thank him for reintroducing him to me, and thought that what he had to say in this video would be something that really will resonate here in Salina at this particular time. So without any further ado, I do want to recognize another Commissioner, Trent Davidson, who's just came in. And without any more ado, let's go ahead and sit back and watch this video.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Ed McMahon, Senior Resident Fellow from the Urban Land Institute. Ed holds the Charles E. Fraser Chair on Sustainable Development at the Urban Land Institute. And as such, he leads ULI's worldwide efforts to conduct research and educational activities related to environmentally sensitive development policies and practices. Ed is the author or co-author of 15 books, over 300 articles, and has served on numerous advisory boards and commissions. He has a BS from Spring Hill College, an MA, Master's in Studies from the University of Alabama, and a Juris Doctorate from Georgetown University Law School. He and his wife live in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Ed McMahon.
Getting the other Ed McMahon. You know, once I showed up in Charlotte, North Carolina, I was going to give a talk, and they had had an article about the Charlotte Observer, and they had it exactly right, except they had a picture of the other Ed McMahon. So they sent a reporter, and that's kind of a big boo-boo for a major newspaper like the Charlotte Observer. So they sent a reporter out to interview me and said, Ed, how does that make you feel? And I said, well, it kind of reminds me of the story that James Michener used to tell. It turns out one day he got a call from this prestigious literary organization in New York telling him he was going to be named America's greatest living writer at an awards program. And he was, of course, very excited about this. And so then he looked at his calendar and realized he had a conflict he couldn't get out of. And so he said, well, I can't go, but maybe you might want to ask Norman Mailer or John Updike or Ann Tyler to stand in for me. And they said, oh, we called them already. They're not available either. So that's a little what it's like to be named Ed McMahon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the future also. I think Eric just gave you a terrific rundown of your local market, and I think that a lot of what I'm going to say is going to reinforce what he has already said. It's an honor for me to be here on behalf of the Urban Land Institute. My colleague, Bill Hudnut, was the first fellow at the Urban Land Institute. He's actually the person who brought me to the Urban Land Institute. But my interest in this topic of downtowns and cities and towns goes back a very long way, and I want to tell you a little story about myself to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. In 1969, I was a young second lieutenant in the United States Army, and I had just finished jungle warfare training, and I had orders to a small fire base in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, and I was getting ready to go. And literally about a week before I'm supposed to fly off to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon, I get a call from the Pentagon. I have a colonel on the other end of the line. He's with the personnel division. He says to me, Lieutenant McMahon, do you have any interest in being reassigned to Germany? And I'm like, okay, let me think about that. Germany or Vietnam? Okay, yes, Germany sounds very exciting to me. I would love to go to Germany. And I got extraordinarily lucky. I was sent to Heidelberg, West Germany, which is the headquarters for the U.S. military in Europe and is one of the most beautiful places on the planet Earth. And I was assigned as an aide to a U.S. general, and then I spent the next 2.5 years of my life flying all over Europe in a helicopter. And that experience completely and totally changed my life, but I didn't quite realize how much it would change my life till I flew home to Birmingham, Alabama, where I grew up. And I got out of the airplane and drove home, and for the first time ever, I saw the American landscape with a completely different set of eyes. Because, ladies and gentlemen, to travel is to learn. And that's what we try to do at the Urban Land Institute, is to learn from other communities and from each other about what's working and what may be not working as well, and how and why the world is changing and where it's going. So yes, as you've already heard, there's a lot of changes ahead. And the one thing I know about small communities is that sometimes people don't like change. Change can be very difficult. There's only two kinds of change, though, in the world we live in. There's planned change and unplanned change. You can grow by choice, or you can grow by chance. You can accept what you're given, or you can create what you want. Abraham Lincoln used to say the best way to predict the future was to create it yourself. And I think that's what you're involved in here as well, is creating your own future. Now, at the Urban Land Institute, we spend a lot of time talking about sustainable economic development, and we spend a lot on community visioning, something you've heard a little bit about already. But I want to talk about what these fundamentally are at their core. First and foremost, they're about our children. They're about our grandchildren. They're about the future, and it's about planning for the future. You know, this concept is also about balance. It's about harmony. It's about the relationship, if you will, between conservation and economic development, between the built environment and the natural environment, between downtown and the rest of town. It's also, I believe, about finding win-win solutions to the problems that face us today. I'm one of those people who think we spend way too much time in America fighting about what we disagree about, and not nearly enough time sitting down community by community to talk about what we do agree about. And when we do that, we find there's incredible amounts of agreement in most communities with most people, but we oftentimes just haven't asked people what's important to them about the future. So, I do spend some of my time dealing with things like this, solar power and wind turbines and green buildings and green roofs and electric cars. And a lot of times people think that's what sustainable development's all about. It's about the new technologies. And yes, it is partially about the new technologies. But, it's a much broader and more important topic than that. If you look up the definition of sustainable in the dictionary, it will tell you that it means enduring. Enduring. A sustainable community, ladies and gentlemen, is a place of enduring value. In fact, in ancient Athens, the city leaders there used to take an oath of office to leave that great city not less but greater, more beautiful, and prosperous than it was left to them. And I think that's your challenge as well. How do you leave Loveland, Colorado, not less, but greater, more beautiful, and prosperous than it was left to you? But as I said, the world is changing, and there's lots of things you have absolutely no control over. The national and global economy, demographics, technology, consumer attitudes and market trends, energy prices, the weather. You have no control over these things, or at least very little. On the economy, Richard Florida has a new book out. It's called The Great Reset. He says how we live, work, and get around is going to change, and the communities that embrace the future will prosper. Those that do not will decline. It's interesting. There's a big sort going on in America, a big sort. When I got out of college many years ago, college graduates were kind of evenly distributed throughout the United States based on population density. That is no longer true. Today, college graduates are clustering in a few major metropolitan areas: Raleigh, Durham, Austin, Texas, Seattle, Washington, D.C. 46% of everyone who lives in the Washington area now has a college degree or higher. But if you go to West Virginia, it's 16%. You go to Las Vegas, it's 18%. Turns out the young people are going where the jobs are. The jobs are going where the young people are. And it turns out that young people will move to a city before they've even gotten a job. They'll say, that's a place I want to live. And then they'll move to that city, and then they'll look for a job. And also, our whole model for economic development is changing. It used to be all about cheap land and cheap labor and low-cost positioning and shotgun recruitment. It's not true anymore. Today, it's about highly trained talent. Today, it's about high-value positioning. It's about laser recruitment. It's about thinking about what you do have instead of what you don't have. Today, quality of life is a critical part of economic development. Economic development is also about choices. Where do you want to attract new industry? Do you want to invest downtown? Do you want to invest out on the strip? Do you want to try to recruit new industry? You want to try to expand what's already here? Let's talk about the issue of business recruitment. When I was growing up, once again, it was all about, you put a industrial park out by the airport, and then we put in sewer and water, and then we tried like crazy to get some plant, factory, or distribution center to move there. Well, we have 25,000 communities competing for a handful of plant, factories, or distribution centers anymore. So it turns out there's some other things that are important, like what you already have in your community and how you build on those things. Now, we always had this idea that it was the silver bullet approach to economic development, the one big thing. And first it was convention centers. We had an arms race in America to build the biggest convention center. And then it was festival marketplaces, which worked fine in Boston and in Baltimore. But did you know that we had 19 cities that built festival marketplaces that went bankrupt? Like in Toledo or Richmond or Norfolk or Jacksonville. It was all about the copycat logic. Well, they worked in Baltimore. It's got to work here. Every market is different. Every place is different. You need to build on what makes you different. Then it was aquariums. Of course, it gotten so bad with aquariums that even a city like Camden, New Jersey said, if we could just spend $100 million building an aquarium featuring the fish of New Jersey, that we could save Camden, New Jersey. Well, they did build that aquarium. There it is. It's a very nice aquarium. I've been there several times, but did it save Camden, New Jersey? No, it did not. Because economic development today, successful economic development, is rarely about the one big thing. It's about lots of small things working synergistically together off of a plan that makes sense for you and your community. Successful cities think small in a big way. And that's why having a vision for the future is so important. Now, Eric told you about some of the changes in population. Nationwide, we're going to add another 95 to 100 million people by 2050. We're the fastest growing industrialized nation in the world. The question in Colorado is not whether you're going to grow, it's how are you going to grow. People are coming. You can't kill the demographers, ladies and gentlemen. People are coming. So the question is, where are you going to put those people? How are you going to move them around? What's this community going to be like when you have another 100,000 people living here? And then we've already heard about some of the demographic changes. We're getting older, we're getting younger, we're getting more diverse. We have more people living alone. Did you know that we have 31 million households today headed by a single person? Where do they want to live? Do they want to live on a 5-acre lot that's too big to farm and too small, too big to mow, but too small to farm? Turns out a lot of those people would love to live in a downtown. And by the way, over 75%, and it's going up, of all American families today have no school-age children. No school-age children. That number is going up. So it's people like me, empty nesters, unrelated singles, young professionals, retirees, single people. We built housing for years, for like 40 years, like everyone in America was the Waltons. The mom, the dad, the 2 kids, and the dog. Let's think about young people today. They're getting married later, if at all. They're driving less. They're adept at technology. They want to live in walkable neighborhoods, places they can get around without a car, etc. Are we ready for that kind of change? Think about the impact of technology, the death of distance. You can do business anywhere in the world today. Today, 60 of the 100 largest cities in America, the biggest employer is a hospital or a university. When I grew up in Birmingham, the biggest employer was the U.S. Steel Company. It doesn't exist there anymore. Today, the biggest employer in the state of Alabama is the University of Alabama Medical Center. Think about how that changes the kind of infrastructure that we need. And then, as I said, capital is footloose. Let me give you an example of this. Some of you have probably heard of Foster Friess. He's a well-known conservative activist. He was one of the leading contributors to Mitt Romney's recent presidential campaign, but he runs a mutual fund company called the Brandywine Investment Group. And this company, for about 40 years, was headquartered in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. That's a busy suburb of Philadelphia. It was founded by his father. And this is a guy who likes to fly fish. So he would fly out to Jackson, Wyoming every summer to go fly fishing. And then one day he's stuck in traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway outside of Philadelphia, and guess what? A light bulb goes on in his mind. He says, hey, I can run a mutual fund company anywhere in the world. And he picks up his entire company and he moves it into downtown Jackson, Wyoming. That's the largest private sector employer in Jackson today. You know why it's there? One reason. It's called access to outdoor recreation. Who would have thought that that was a driving force in economic development? Yeah, consumer attitudes are changing very rapidly. Malls are like totally uncool, say hip teens. What's this article about? Front page article from USA Today. It says it's about the fact that the average amount of time that an American spends in a mall or a strip shopping center has been going down for years. People go to buy what they want and they leave. So, how does that affect us? Well, one of the things that it's affecting is these market trends. We already heard from Eric that the old one-size-fits-all model no longer works anymore because we have all these other groups now, and they all want something that's different. So economic development, well, yes, it's about talent. An indispensable asset in a knowledge-based economy is highly educated people. It's also about innovation, the ability to generate new ideas and turn them into a reality. It's about connectivity. Communities thrive when people and ideas can easily connect. But it's also about distinctiveness. Distinctiveness. Joe Courtwright, who used to run a group called CEOs for Cities, he put it this way. He says, a unique characteristic of a place may be the only truly defensible source of competitive advantage for regions and communities. Well, what does he mean by that? It means be yourself. Build on what you already have. Some of you probably heard this slogan, keep Austin weird. Well, that's not just a funny slogan. It's an economic development imperative. It means keep Austin different, unusual, and unique. It means let Austin stand out. Let Austin be itself. Let Austin build on its assets instead of trying to compete head-on with every other city in the world in a place where we have choices about where we go. It turns out today, ladies and gentlemen, place matters. Place is incredibly important. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's take a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important and a bad first impression is hard to change. Do you think you'd rather visit the town of Franklin, Tennessee? Would you rather go to the town of Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community you would rather invest time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say this afternoon, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like. What they look like. Let me give you a couple of examples. This is the official travel guide for the state of Oregon. It says, I don't know if you can read it in the back of the room, it says, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine if you had a state tourism brochure for Colorado that says something like, Colorado, things look the same here? Well, of course not. Because why would anybody come? What is tourism? Tourism is about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. The more any place in Colorado comes to look just like every place else, the less reason there is to go there. On the other hand, the more a community does to enhance its uniqueness, whether that's cultural, architectural, natural, whatever, the more people want to go there because that's exactly what it is. If every place was just like every place else, there'd be no reason to go any place. So, sameness is a minus. It is not a plus. If you can't differentiate Loveland, Colorado from any other place, you will have no competitive advantage. And I was totally blown away today by some of the competitive advantages you already have. Like no one has a sculpture park like I saw today. That is a world-class asset. A world-class asset. An asset that's worth building on. Now, I know some people say, well, okay, yeah, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You really think so? You really think that's true? Let me ask you this. Do you think this scenic view has more economic value, or do you think that scenic view has more economic value? Let me tell you what some of the leading real estate appraisers in the world say about this topic. They say, quote, you can put a dollar value on a view. Scenic landscapes are an economic asset, not just because you and I think they're nice, but because other people are willing to pay to see the view and to experience the unique character of a place. They go on to say, quote, housing, hotels, offices with scenic views always command premium prices. The better the view, the higher the price. You know, it's really easy to understand this concept if you think about it. You go to the beach in the summer, you rent a hotel room with a view of the ocean, you will pay more for that room than the exact same room on the other side of the hotel. Turns out, ladies and gentlemen, the scenic landscapes of northern Colorado have quantifiable economic value, which is one of the reasons why some of these landscapes are worth preserving. Now, the home builders were trying to figure all this out. This is some years ago. In 1994, they did a study. They were trying to figure out what would add value to a house more than any other thing. The garage, how many cars you could park, the kitchen, the kind of appliances. Did you have a swimming pool or not? Here's what they found. They found, quote, the surrounding environment is the single most important factor affecting the market value of a home, the surrounding environment. They went on to say, quote, a mountain vista or proximity to a park or water or green space affects the value of a home more than the size of the house, the number of rooms, the type of appliances, or even the presence of a swimming pool. The surrounding environment is the single most important factor affecting the market value of a home. So think about green space. Literally there are hundreds of studies that show that green space increases the value of adjacent property. Let me give you just an example. Where's the most valuable land in all of New York State? Well, there it is. It's the land next to Central Park. So it turns out actually, investing in building a park is not just spending, it's an investment in increased value. Now let's talk about some other ways that the world is changing. This is the Sears Tower in Chicago in 1992. It was, an iconic building. But in 1992, Sears decided to move out of the Sears Tower, which is now known as the Willis Tower, and to move to a suburban office park in a place called Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Well, guess what? Sears is now moving back into downtown Chicago. Why? Because it turns out that's where young knowledge workers want to be. Red Hat, that's the second largest business software company in America after Oracle. They've just moved from this suburban office park to that downtown building in Raleigh, North Carolina. Here's a list of just a few of the companies, and we've been tracking this. We have a list of several hundred major Fortune 500 companies that are moving from the suburbs into a downtown. Amazon, 11,000 workers in South Lake Union in downtown Seattle, as an example. DaVita's headquarters at Union Station in Denver, they moved from suburban office park in El Segundo, California, to downtown across the street from the main rail station in Colorado. And this is where the world happens to be going. And it's even happening in small towns like Greenwood, Mississippi, where Viking Stoves has moved their international headquarters. Now, this is a magazine for industrial park developers. Notice the headline, when site searching the South, make sure you inspect a community's downtown first. Why in the world would an industrial park developer care about a community's downtown? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they've kind of figured out that if you don't have a healthy downtown, you don't have a healthy town. The downtown, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart and soul of any community. The apple rots from the inside out. It's kind of hard to be a suburb of nothing. So the downtown is actually very important to all the rest of town as well. And let me show you the math of downtown. Turns out that downtown mixed-use projects are pound for pound way more productive than kind of like what we did for the last 40 years. Here's a Walmart in Asheville, and there's a new downtown mixed-use project in Asheville. Turns out the downtown mixed-use project on 0.2% acre produces more taxes, more jobs and more residents per acre than the Walmart. Now, isn't that interesting? Of course, no one lives at the Walmart, although that's changing. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And it turns out that, you know, in terms of what you're going to produce, so if you don't do something like this, you know where you're going to have to get taxed? You're going to have to build 600 suburban housing units to replace the taxes that you could generate from a mixed-use downtown project. I was recently in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I saw these two Waffle Houses. I took pictures of both of them. One was out off the interstate highway, just like what we've done for years. It was just right off of an interstate exit, big parking lot, you know, just all by itself. And here's another Waffle House right in downtown Fayetteville. And it's got, you know, 3 floors of apartments upstairs. No parking, dedicated parking in front of the building. Which one makes more money? Well, it turns out, yes, the downtown one makes 15% more than the one out on the Strip. And it turns out because nobody lives above the one out on the Strip, but there's lots of people who live upstairs. They come down all the time. And also all these students are wandering around downtown Fayetteville, and they're looking for someplace to go. So here's our old paradigm, ladies and gentlemen, for commercial development. You know, but I want to tell you about the future belongs to town centers, to main streets, to downtowns. Strip development is development for the last century. The future belongs to you and your downtowns. Here's an example. This is Frederick, Maryland. In 1976, they had a terrible flood that practically destroyed about half of the downtown. Nobody lived downtown. They didn't have any stores. Today, 5,000 people live in downtown Frederick, Maryland. They have 800 small businesses, including 25 high-tech firms, in a small city downtown. You know, here's some of the reasons why this change is occurring. You know, for one thing, we were building retail space in America faster than anybody else in the world. We went from 4 square feet of retail space per person in the 1960s to almost, 40 square feet by the year 2000. You know, we have double the retail space of everybody in the world per person. And, if we didn't learn anything else in the recession, we learned we're overstored, particularly out on the Strip, where we have hundreds and hundreds and over a billion square feet of vacant retail space today in America, mostly in empty big box stores. And the reason why? Because we were building retail space 5 times faster than retail sales for about 30 years in the United States. So it was just one shopping center was cannibalizing the next one. And then think about this. In 1960, if you had 200,000 square feet of retail, it was in a downtown street, had a footprint of about 1 acre, it was in a 4-story building, we called it a department store. And then by the year 1980, if you had 200,000 square feet of retail space, it was in a 1-story building. It was, on a 12 to 20 acre site, and we called it a Walmart. But, we could actually do the same thing again. But the problem was that model was we had to drive everywhere for everything. And now the internet has come along. So Bed Bath & Beyond, Borders, Blockbusters, they're all disappeared because of the internet. The fastest growing retailer in America is Amazon. Turns out, who invented the superstore concept? It was Staples, the office supply company. They created this term called category killer. And all the superstores were 25 to 40,000 square feet. They're now the second biggest online retailer. So all their stores are shrinking to like 5,000 square feet. So it means they can come back into a downtown. In fact, they're doing that. Look at the Walmart paradigm. First it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now it's getting smaller, smaller, and smaller. 4,000 square foot Walmart just opened in Atlanta, Georgia, about a month ago. 15,000 square foot so-called express stores. Well, you could put those in a downtown. Let me show you a couple of examples in a minute. So this is from the New York Times. It says our love affair with malls is on the rocks. Why do they say that? Well, because 10% of all the malls in the United States, 10% of all the malls have closed since 2006. We've only opened 1 new and closed mall in this entire country since 2006. We predict we're going to close another 10% of the malls. There's an incredible website called deadmalls.com. Go on it. There's an interactive map of the United States. Click on Colorado. You'll get a list of all the dead or dying malls. like the Villa Italia Mall in Lakewood, Colorado. It's now been replaced by Belmar, a mixed-use 22-square block neighborhood with all kinds of things in it. You know, here's an example. This is where I live. This is Montgomery County, Maryland. This was our county seat, 1970. In their infinite wisdom, Rockville, Maryland decided to tear down almost their entire downtown and to replace it with that lovely 200-store mall you see in the background there. But guess what? Now they've torn the mall down, put the downtown back. And that's kind of a metaphor for America. And that's happening all over the United States, ladies and gentlemen. Downtowns are coming back. You are poised to bring this place back to life in a big way. And you know, a parking lot is a terrible thing to waste. This is the new promised land. You know, it's so funny about parking. You know, how many people here have ever been to the Pike Place Farmers Market in Seattle? Let me see a show of hands. Yeah, many of you. Did you know that about 30 years ago there were a couple people on the Seattle City Council who seriously proposed tearing down the Pike Place Market? Why? They said, well, we need more downtown parking. Like parking for what? You can have all the parking in the world if there's nothing to do. No one's ever going to want to go there. If you have a parking problem, that means you're successful. 2 years ago, we were in Buffalo, New York. They thought they had a parking problem. They said, we want an analysis of all our parking needs. We did an analysis. Turns out 50% of downtown Buffalo, New York is surface level parking. We said, hey, your problem is not a lack of parking. Your problem is a lack of buildings. You need to actually build something. Then people will want to park down there. So, you know, and here's what you can do with a parking lot. You can turn it into a place. And, you know, so here's kind of like the old model, spread out, single use, drive only. Now here's another Best Buy. This is in Minneapolis. Actually, this is in a suburb of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park, Minnesota, with a Best Buy on the first floor and apartments upstairs. And you could do this in any small community. Here's a brand new Dairy Queen in the small town of Herndon, Virginia. There's a dentist office upstairs. How appropriate. You know, and then think about this. You know, for years, we pulled together a group of developers about 6 or 7 years ago, and we asked them, so talk about strips. We said, what are the single defining characteristics of strips in America? They said, well, they're ugly and they're congested. Well, think about that. You try to run a successful marketing campaign around that slogan. Hey, shop here, we're both ugly and congested. Come on down. That's completely unsustainable, particularly if you have an alternative to it. And what do you think happens to all the places like that in America if gasoline ever reaches $5 a gallon, or $6 a gallon, or $8 a gallon, the way it already is in Europe? Think about that. You know, let's show you an example of how this works. Here's two Barnes & Noble bookstores. One is on Rockville Pike. That's the super strip of the state of Maryland. That is the busiest road in the state of Maryland. It has lots of convenient parking in front of it. The other one is in downtown Bethesda, Maryland. It's in a 3-story building. It sits on the sidewalk. There's no parking in front of the building. Which one makes more money? Well, it turns out, ladies and gentlemen, the one on the right makes 20% more per square foot than the one on the left. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, how can you get here? There's only one way to get there. It's called drive your car. How can you get there? It turns out there's 4 ways to get to downtown Bethesda. 4 ways. Well, you can drive, and guess what? There's a 5-story parking garage behind that Barnes & Noble. It's surrounded by stores on all sides. The Washington Metro has a stop a block away, so you can take a train there. There's a bicycle trail across the street called the Capitol Crescent Trail. It's an abandoned railroad line turned into a hiker-biker trail. It's across the street. And guess what? Thousands of people can walk to this Barnes & Noble because thousands of people live within a 10-minute walk. So 4 ways to get to one store, 1 way to get the other. And what's the other big difference? It's something we call the place-making dividend. That's a real estate term that simply means this. People stay longer, come back more often, and spend more money in places that attract their affection. How many Coloradoans do you think really feel affectionate about strip malls? How many people want to go to the strip mall to hang out? Well, the skateboarders, maybe. But people will go to a downtown and hang out. They'll walk around. And the more this downtown grows, the better it's going to get. You'll say, well, there's nothing really to shop here for now, but there will be. If I come back in 5 years, I predict this will be a completely different place than it was from even 5 years before. You know, and part of the reason for this, because there's only one place in America with more spending power than stores, and that is in our downtowns. Because we built everything out of the downtown for 25 or 30 years. And so all the retailers are breaking all their rules to go back into our cities and to go back downtown. Mixed-use project. Here's a Safeway with, count them, 6 stories of offices and housing on the other side on top, or a Whole Foods in a really tiny little building, or a Target in a 5-story building, or a Walmart with parking on the roof. Who'd have thought? I love this quote from the Vice President of Real Estate at Walmart. He says, quote, "We've reached a stage where we can be flexible. We no longer have to build a gray blue battleship box." Well, thank you very much, Mr. Walmart. But, you know, here's the old paradigm. Let me show you the new paradigm. There it is. You know, it's actually, if you put it in a 2-story building, that means you use half as much land. That means you can actually put it back downtown, like a department store. And in fact, this is happening all over the country. And the big issue, of course, was, well, how do we get our shopping carts up and down? And the answer to that was, well, hey, we did figure out how to put a man on the moon. I think we can figure out how to get the shopping carts up and down. And, of course, this is now what's going on. That's the first Walmart in America where people will be living upstairs, under construction right now in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. And by the way, Tyson's Corner was America's first edge city. It's a place they have 3 rush hours a day, 3, morning, evening, lunch, because no one can walk to anything. So guess what they're doing in Tyson's Corner right now? They're putting in a street grid. They're building sidewalks. They've completed 4 new rail transit stops, which will open in January of 2014. They're building a place instead of a place to just drive away from. So here's a Target, brand new, Stamford, Connecticut. Here's the world headquarters for Target, 4-story building right in downtown Minneapolis. They're actually restoring the department stores. Target has now been buying up old abandoned department stores, like the Carson Prairie Scott building in Chicago or the Galleria building. How about this one? Here's the Home Depot in New York, 5 stories. Somebody asked me, well, how do you get your lumber home? Well, guess what? They deliver. Well, something we used to always do in America, and then we forgot about it. So I want to end by talking just for a few minutes about the secrets of successful communities. I've worked in every state, all 50 states, probably 500 communities over the last 30 years. And I've come to some conclusions about why some communities succeed and others fail. And first and foremost, successful communities, in my judgment, have a vision for the future. Some might call that a plan for the future. And, you know, as I said, I grew up in Alabama, and I go home from time to time, and there are people there who you'll hear on the news saying things like, "I'm against planning." And, you know, when I hear that, I always want to ask that person, well, then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. You know, money flows to vision. You heard that before. And those visions almost always start by inventorying your assets. And then successful communities build their plans, whether it's an economic development plan or a land use plan or a tourism plan, around the enhancement of their existing assets. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Now, I didn't say I'm against regulation. It prevents bad things from happening, but you got to use carrots, not just sticks. Successful communities pick and choose among development proposals. All development is not created equal. Some development will make a community a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. Some won't. Successful communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefits. Successful communities consider what they look like. Successful communities have strong leaders and committed citizens. Let me give you a couple of examples. Chattanooga, Tennessee. 1970, it was voted the worst place to live in the United States. It was called the most polluted city in America. It was routinely referred to as a patch of rust in the Sun Belt. Well, nobody makes fun of Chattanooga anymore. Today it's known as an international model for sustainable development and community revitalization. And it all began with a vision for the future. And you know, they decided to focus on 2 things. This was all of downtown used to look like this. They decided to bring downtown back to life, because downtown's the heart and soul of any community. And they didn't take the hardest project first. They didn't take the biggest project first. They took the smallest project first, because they realized that nothing succeeds like success. So they took that one building and they restored it. And then people said, how'd you do that? And then they did bigger projects like this. That's the Outlet Mall in Chattanooga. It's in old warehouse buildings in downtown. And then they decided to build a park along the Tennessee River, because that was their most important natural asset. That was a very expensive endeavor, but, you know, they realized something incredibly important, and that was this. How much something costs is the second most important question in a community. It's not the most important. The most important question facing any community is, what should we do? What should we do? And it turns out money always follows good ideas, especially those ideas come out of a consenting building process. And they built that park, and that park has leveraged billions of dollars of new investment directly adjacent to it. And because they had a vision for the future, they were able to do some pretty remarkable things. This is the Walnut Street Bridge, obsolete highway bridge. They were going to tear it down. Tennessee DOT had set aside $4.5 million to demolish it. But they said, hey, we got a better idea. Why don't you give us the same amount of money? We'll turn it into the nation's longest pedestrian bridge. Now connects one side of the Tennessee River with the other side. So, you know, anybody ever heard of Susan City, California? This was voted the worst place to live in Northern California. This was their city hall. It was in 2 double-wide trailers. Only city hall in California had a register with the Department of Motor Vehicles. But it turns out public buildings are kind of important. Public buildings should set the standard in our community, and they always did for about 200 years, and then we decided cheaper was better. Turns out what we've learned is cheaper is simply cheaper. And what they said in Susan City was, why would anybody invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? So they said, we need to set the standard, and they built a new city hall right in that same spot. And a decade later, they were voted one of the best places to live in Northern California, but it all began with an investment in themselves. Successful communities inventory their assets, and sometimes those assets are pretty obvious. Welcome to Jackson, Wyoming, or welcome to Annapolis, Maryland. Sometimes they're not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. A dying industrial city that had an unemployment rate of 28%. I thought it had no assets. But what it had was abandoned textile mills, and it had a vision for how to reuse those mills. Today, this city attracts almost 1 million tourists a year, a city that had never seen a single one because they thought about the future. How about Poughkeepsie, New York? Had an abandoned railroad bridge across the Hudson River, 274 feet above the river, sat vacant since 1973. Today, it's the walkway across the Hudson. 500,000 people a year are coming to this small town because of this project. How about the torpedo factory in Alexandria, Virginia, which people said, well, it's an eyesore, we need to tear it down. Today, it's the most successful arts center in the United States of America, which is one of the key things that brought downtown Alexandria back to life. Paducah, Kentucky took their flood wall and turned it into an outdoor gallery. And I could go on and on. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives. Why do we educate? We educate in order to reduce the need to regulate. We educate because you have a right to choose the future, but to know what the choices are. We also need to use incentives, you know. And there's a lot of different kinds of incentives. In Paducah, they offered abandoned houses for $1 to artists. And you know, after they started doing that, they've restored an entire district by doing that. Or how about this building? This is the Lone Star Brewery in San Antonio. Sat vacant until they used an historic preservation tax credit, turned into a great museum of art. Successful communities pick and choose. Successful communities have hometown heroes. And it's not always easy. I know it's not always getting things easy in small communities in America. You know, and no matter what your vision for Loveland is, there will be people who will tell you, can't do it, won't work, costs too much, tried it already. And I want to tell you, no is a powerful word in America, but you know what's a more powerful word? Yes. Yes, we can make Loveland a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. Ladies and gentlemen, a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. You know, even if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get an awful lot done. I love this quote from Monty Python about public officials. They say, apart from sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public order, roads, irrigation, public health, and freshwater system, what have the Romans ever done for us? You know, ladies and gentlemen, a vision counts, but implementation is priceless. Thank you so much for having me here this evening.
Let's take a look. We've got about an hour. Just kind of keeping you all on some sort of target for us to digest it. Now, I saw it 3 weeks ago for the second time, and I saw it today, and I'm still trying to write notes as fast as I can. And so, those of you who've seen it for the first time, it's a little overwhelming in terms of what's there and what can you pick from it that you like or whatever. And I know you're going to tell me I need to be back up there again, right? I don't want to do that, but I'm going to just for the sake of this. The video itself gave us great courage for the future. When I used to work with staff, whenever we were going to have a new reading program or a new science program or a new something program, there was a lot of panic, a lot of concern, a lot of worries. I always spent time trying to let them know what we already had, what we already knew, what we had already experienced. And my experience has been is that most of the time you build on what you already have and what you already know, and you take the next little bite. And the first thing you know, you get where you're going. And so I think as you looked at this, I'm going to encourage you to just let your mind wander a second and think of the things that you saw in there that are part of Salina, Kansas. Think of some of the initiatives that have begun that have a feel like some of the things in this video. And I'd like for you to think about talking about those a little bit. I'm going to try to use this as a format. Feel free to go off script. I don't know any other way. I think shouting out might be a little difficult, so kind of let me know that you have something to say. And Randall, there you go. That's how it works.
As I was watching this, I was thinking, well, Salina is a great experiment for this kind of thinking, because I can't imagine a city is more spread out than we are. I can't imagine. I can't imagine a city that's as spread out as we are, and that could benefit more by rethinking and by careful planning and thinking differently about how cities should grow. It's so easy in a city like ours in the middle of the Midwest, where land is relatively cheap, just to keep spreading around. But that's not necessarily the smartest thing to do, according to what we're being told here. And I can believe that. I'm one of those 78% that would probably not, I would love not to have to mow my grass anymore. If there was something downtown to move into, I'd probably, do it.
Okay.
Let a young family have my house. So I think there's a lot of benefit that can be derived from launching into this kind of process in looking 20 years or 50 years into the future.
Please let me, I think right now what I'm sensing is that there are some folks who just want to react to what they've seen in a broad sense, and so let's do that for 5 or 10 minutes here. So if somebody else wants to react in a general sense to what we've just seen, please do that, and then we'll try to focus back in on some specifics. Anybody else have something that they saw that just says, it's got to be said, right here? Let's wait for the mic, I guess. I've got to have a mic, you've got to have a mic.
All right. I was moved by the visuals in this presentation. I've been poking around a lot in our comprehensive plan, and though there are small little thumbnails, the imaginative vision of the mixed-use developments that are a part of the plan, I think we need to bring that to the imagination of the public more. We're not, an investor comes in, they think of a project. Yes, it fits kind of in the plan, but how it looks, how it fits at street level with everything else around it. We need to work, I think, on reinforcing a vision for something that's really creative and in the vein of what's in this movie.
Well, I think the story that comes to mind is I could describe, if you were visually impaired, and I could describe an elephant to you and describe all the characteristics of an elephant, it's not nearly as powerful as you actually seeing an elephant. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that all of us involved with the planning part of it have heard the word mixed-use development, and I don't know how many of us really know what that looks like. And I think that's what you're saying. I think it's a very powerful statement. Others? And this is for everyone. So those of you who aren't a part of one of these commissions, please join in.
One thing that I always like about downtown Salina and going through downtown Salina, I like to look up at the tops of the buildings, and I like to see the names and the dates, because what it makes me think of is at one time there was a dream of what this community was going to be, and everybody put their name to that dream in the downtown. And I love to see that, and I think it's something maybe we could borrow from with building this future that we're talking about.
That's interesting. You know, we do that to some extent, yet we have architects and members of school boards and so forth who put plaques inside of a building someplace, but seldom do we actually build it right on the exterior for God in the whole world to see and say, they took a chance. That's interesting. Keep it going.
I'm kind of like you. That's what I've always done. But also the historical value is there, and the architecture is so much different in those years. And some of it is we really need to hang on to. So building new buildings is not necessarily where it ought to be. It ought to be restoring some of the old buildings, I think, that still have that historical value and the name at the top. That's really, to me, that's really great.
Others? Just so that we don't forget that there isn't any one person in this room or in this building or even in Salina who has the vision. But Salina does have a vision, and that vision was put together several years ago through extensive surveys and community meetings and so forth, and it resulted in a comprehensive plan. So when we talk about our vision for Salina, mine may be slightly different than yours, but we have to remember that we have all bought into a common vision, and we really haven't changed that yet. And this meeting isn't to talk about, let's see if we can come up with a new comprehensive plan. I think it is to say we have this vision, this comprehensive plan. How do some of these new things begin to fit in there?
What was the date of this? You know?
13.
I saw 2013 on there, so I didn't know if that was on there.
Well, and as John is preparing, the interesting thing that I thought there too is that I wished I could have been at that conference, because before this person came and kind of tied it all up in a nice bow, there were some nuts and bolts, some grunt work done to try to determine what exactly was the market in Loveland, Colorado. And I think, for us to project some of these things on Salina without doing our due diligence, without doing the grunt work that says, what is the market? What will the market support? Is something we need to do. John.
Right. And my comment was going to be directed kind of towards that, because what would have been ideal is if we could have gotten a presentation that he did that was more local. And unfortunately, fortunately, we had staff was able to see Mr. McMahon in Wichita, I believe it was in October, when he presented to the League of Kansas Municipalities annual conference. And so if you can imagine, and that's a conference where you have city managers, city council people, commissioners, governing bodies, all those types of people at that event. So if you can imagine, all these people saw a version of this, and quite frankly, this might have been Loveland, Colorado, but he's done them in Tennessee, all, as he said, in all 50 states across the country and everywhere else. And so everybody else is not only seeing information like this, they're actually doing it. And if we can just think of, and I think it's where it adds value, that we have at least something that we can have a conversation around. And because a lot of the times, we'll talk about smart growth, and we'll talk about developing the city core, which is kind of what he's talking about. Downtown is also city core neighborhoods and those types of areas. And it's going on all over the place. I think it's valuable for us to be able to see that these aren't just a few people's ideas. These are ideas that are nationwide, statewide, and worldwide to an extent, but as it pertains to our history of development patterns, it's particularly helpful for us to see that we're not the only people trying to do this type of thing. So,
I would bet that this is true of almost everybody in the room, but there were just so many things in that film to react to about how it applies to Salina, and I certainly don't pretend to have any answers, but several things ran through my mind. Last week we had a meeting of the Big View Project for Circles of the Heartland, which is about eradicating poverty. Besides the really valuable interaction with people who are working people in Salina, one thing that's pretty clear to me is that there are some people who are being exploited wage-wise in Salina. We really need to think about jobs that will enable people to come downtown or wherever to be able to participate in some of the activities that are here that make Salina distinctive. And that was one key point that they made. As I looked at Midfield, California, or whatever it was, the really bad strip mall example that he had about the entrance to the town, at the Dawn's Early Light sculpture at the south end of town gets a lot of bad press. But at least it's something that distinguishes that end of Salina from that kind of god-awful looking strip mall look. Not that there isn't plenty of strip mall look there, but the more we can do to enhance what's there, but also begin to pull it downtown. So that's another point. I don't have an answer to that. One final thing is that many of the projects in this film were about Walmart, Amazon, et cetera, coming to downtown sites. The problem with that is that the money that goes to those stores goes out of town the minute it hits the store. And how we manage to get building downtown or in malls, wherever, that keeps dollars in the community, I don't have a solution to that. But I think it's a question that needs to be asked by City Commission, Planning Commission, and by citizens in Salina. So,
I hope as we do this that we are very sensitive to the fact that there are many, many citizens of Salina who have made huge investments in the way Salina is right now. And there isn't any one part of Salina that is good or bad. It's just a function, this is where we are, but where do we want to go? That's more important than anything else. I want to be sure that there isn't a right or a wrong answer. The temptation in listening to this guy is that even though he says it, you kind of get that, oh, this is a silver bullet thing, and it's not a silver bullet. This is not, what he's suggesting is probably some of the most difficult work that we have ever done. Just trying to move ahead just a bit, just kind of look at, one of the things he talked about is trying to decide, well, what in the world does this community have? What are its assets? Why Salina? I ask myself that on the way every day. Jerry, why Salina? Why are you here? And you know what's interesting? I've lived here 43 years, and it's changed. I came to Salina because I had a job before I graduated from college. I did a practice interview in Salina, Kansas. They offered me a job the same day. I didn't ask my wife. I took it and then went back to Hayes and told her. So, why Salina? At that point, it was jobs. But just to throw that back out and say, ask you, let's see if we can come up with 8 or 10 here, just boom, boom. What are the assets of Salina? Why Salina? Anybody. And the mic's not going to keep up with us. We're going to get stymied by that mic. So shout them out. I think Aaron's got one he's ready to shout with.
Well, I think what we've been discussing all along, and I think our strongest asset is our core, our downtown. A lot of unique. I think Salina is a canvas waiting to be painted. I mean, we've got the paints, we've got everything there. We've got a downtown with some really gorgeous buildings. Thankfully, our predecessors on the city commission saved one of the biggest assets, which was struck very close to home here, as they talked about, let's knock the Steeple Theater down, the Fox Theater, and let's make a parking lot. What would our community be like today if the Steeple Theater wasn't there? The Steeple Theater has to be the single largest driving force behind the survival of Salina's downtown, in my opinion. I think, but for that, Salina's downtown probably would have died off.
Other assets. And again, the microphone may not keep up. River. Do you want to elaborate, or you just want to leave it as that?
I think it's a landmark that has potential.
If you ever listen to the people who talk about I just lost the name of the Texas town with the big river in it. No, San Antonio. You know, it was interesting. That really wasn't, for the most part, a government project. It was some lady, some individual who bought up 3/4 of that and, you know, has more money than God at this time. You know, but it's one of those things, you can't put a river where one doesn't exist. So, river. And I may have taken that away from you, Randall, I'm sorry. But that you can't ignore what's there. Other things that are assets for our town.
Regional healthcare.
Regional health care, yeah. Schools. Transportation, I-70, I-35. This is going to put us in running for lots of things. Amen. You know, we took a real shot when they closed the base about the time I moved here in the early 70s. And there was a lot of crying and gnashing of teeth. And it's a little bit like a farmer who plants a crop of wheat and works all year long to get it ready to go, and the night before he goes out to cut it, a hailstorm wipes him out. That farmer may cry for a little bit, may pout for a little bit. The next morning he pulls on his boots and goes out and starts working the land. And that's Salina. We did that with that.
Was that what they said?
People, the people.
Because without the people, it doesn't make any difference on what you do. Without the people or without engagement of the people, none of this stuff's ever going to happen.
Amen.
Our parks.
Parks.
You know, Kenwood and all the recreational parks, school playground. The art community.
Arts.
Our airport.
Airport, along with the highway, transportation. Yeah.
Colleges and universities.
Yeah.
I was there, ag tech industries could be a real huge growth force. I mean, between Veris and GeoProbe and some of the other companies like that, we could become a regional, I mean, not regional, we could become a worldwide hub for that.
If we had 10 hours, we could take either one of those, the colleges, and then break it down through, K-State, Salina, and all that, We don't have time for that, but I hope it almost makes you jumpy inside thinking of all the things that we have. All of the things that we have. With parks, just my own little sidelight there, is that we have, as a city, decided that on developments, you can pay a fee to the parks, or you can build a park. And to me, as I listen to this, it makes me kind of wonder, maybe we ought to say that every development ought to have so many square feet of park. And that's a two-edged sword. The developer is going to perhaps lose some developable land, but we as a city, we as a community are going to have to put the resources to maintain and stock that park so that it is fun for people to use. But, I'm thinking, anyway, others, I'm sorry. Yes?
Yeah, I think we miss, maybe somebody said this already, but I think we miss a lot by being the crossroads of America with the I-70, I-35 interchange. And to me, we're the crossroads of America.
That's a good one point. I would actually argue that we rely too heavily on that. The myth that something magic will happen because we are those two interstates. Every time I hear somebody talk about Salina, they always say, I-70, I-35. What does two highways mean to get you? We can't be a distribution center necessarily per se. There's no huge manufacturing company here distributing things. People come through us, we can grab them. We have to have a reason to grab them. No huge industry is going to build here because we have them. We have to have the resources. There has to be a reason for that. And I fear sometimes we put too much stake in that instead of what we already have.
Well, I think there's always redistribution, too.
Well,
there are places that manufacture Trink. I happened to be on vacation last week, and I watched a freighter being unloaded with all these containers.
Yeah.
Those weren't made there, but it was amazing the number of people who were at work unloading that container ship, loading them on trucks, and those trucks were leaving just like bees out of there. Now, I'm not sure I would like to live right next to that particular spot, but I would sure like to have the income that particular thing generates.
And we all would. I worry if we put too much stake in that.
I think that we have, as a community, a desire to stay connected with our heritage. I mean, we all love the old buildings and that type of thing. And Heritage Commission we have that, and it's ordinance to do that and protect when we can older buildings. And so I think that we have a rich desire for our historic past.
Just one or two other assets before we move to another area, because we're going to run out of time just talking about how good we are. And that's nice, except we also need to talk about how we're going to solve some of the things that aren't perfect. Anybody else have an asset? Did I see a question coming out over there?
Comment. We have actually a pretty diverse housing. And you can get an apartment, you can get a townhome, you can get a house, a small yard, big house, little house, new house, old house.
Except we need some housing for older folks. They don't have to own the yard.
I'd say our townhouses are pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I will stay with it. One comment about Salina and our perception of ourselves. I think it's somewhere outside of Kansas City, and I hope the sign is gone. But it used to say, Salina tonight, the Rockies tomorrow. We ought to torch that sign. That's not what we want for Salina. Yeah.
I'd like to say gateway to the Rockies.
Is that what it said?
That's what
It
somebody
may have said, but
by the time they got the good one, they were like, what? Yeah.
well, but there's an urban legend that has become part of our culture almost that says, we're just a good place to stop over.
Right.
A tour bus needs to stop every 2.5 hours to let people out so they can stretch their legs and so forth. Salina's got to be more than that. Yeah. And I'm editorializing, I apologize. Let's move on to the third thing, because I think it probably is a big crux of it. And it says use education, incentives, and not just regulations. And I liked what he said, a carrot as opposed to the stick. And so just react to things that we could or should or may already be doing in Salina that would fit in that category of education and incentives not as opposed to, along with, or maybe primary to regulation.
Well, we're going to get a staff overview.
Oops, I'm sorry. Tell me. Tell me what you want, folks. We got 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Do you have things you want to talk about, or you want to actually?
I think if we're going to discuss whatever the incentives and stuff are, that we ought to be offering opinion off of the same information.
How long is that going to take, Dean? Okay. Well, I agree with that entirely. I just didn't want us to spend 35 of 45 minutes doing that. So we'll spend some time on it. Thank you.
As Mr. Blanchard mentioned, we just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page, knowing what types of incentives that we do have that are available and sometimes not always utilized. And some of those came out of the 1992 comprehensive plan. One of those was a waiver of building permit fees for basically any property that is north of Iron and north of State Street. If you do a major addition or construct a building, your building permit fees are waived. For some people, that's a major, and it may not be a be-all incentive, but for, say, ADM Manufacturing that built a building up on Pacific, which is a fairly expensive building, their building permit fees were zero. So that was an incentive available there. The other program that we have had since the mid-90s, and it's still up for debate about whether it's influencing investment or not. Just this morning, I worked through a project with Daryl Bixby, and I just wanted to give you an example of how it works. But we have a neighborhood revitalization program that, again, is targeted most of the northern part of the community and the central core of downtown. But there was a vacant lot at the corner of 11th and Ash. Mr. Bixby took that lot. It was valued at $5,180 by the county appraiser. He enrolled that property in the neighborhood revitalization program. He built a duplex on the property. That duplex is valued by the county appraiser at $169,000. He is enrolled in the program for the first 5 years that duplex is on the property. He will be paying taxes on a $5,100 vacant lot. And then years 6 through 10, that is cut in half. But that is an incentive that's out there that is available. It's available in the core area. I just got done working with Assurance Partners on their tax rebate application. That property was valued at the start of their project at $180,000. The current value from the county appraiser is $1.6 million. In years 1 through 5, they will continue paying property tax at the same rate as $180,000 property, because they'll get a portion rebated of what they pay, and then that'll be cut in half in years 6 through 10. So those are the primary tools that we have. We also have, for buildings like the Stiefel Theater and for other designated historic properties, the Roosevelt Lincoln Housing Project was done. They used the tax rebate program. They used low and moderate income tax credits, and it's a National Register historic property, so they use state and national historic tax credits. So those incentives are all out there for those types of projects. And sometimes we think we're doing a good job of making everybody aware and educating the public and the development community about those incentives that are there. There's been a number of downtown buildings renovated and taken advantage of that program. The only other thing that has been discussed that has not been implemented is that a number of Kansas communities have designated their downtown Main Street as a historic district. And their primary reason for doing that is to make the historic tax credits available for building renovations. The downside of a historic district is it comes with additional regulation as part of the incentive. Part of our answer has been that we already have a downtown design review board and downtown design guidelines, so we have the regulation without the incentive. So the historic district designation gives you some incentive along with the regulation. We don't currently have that incentive available. But
Dean, I have a question about the incentive you were talking about downtown, where there's a $5,100 piece of property and then was developed. Tell me about how much extra time that adds to that project if a person goes ahead and applies for those incentives. I think sometimes I don't do certain kinds of things because I think it's going to take me a whole lot of time and a whole lot of paperwork. So kind of what does it add to the development for someone to apply for those things?
well, I guess we'll ask Brian Richardson if you thought it was an onerous process for your properties. I know we have one in now, but I think the primary efforts that the property owner has to do is when the county appraiser establishes a beginning value, we ask the property owner to come in and sign to say that they are accepting and agree with that value. And then when the final value comes in, we want to make sure that the owner agrees with that and they're not going to appeal their valuation to the county appraiser, and that it will be the final tax value. But that is on the property owner's side. Most of the work is either done by city staff or in conjunction with the county appraiser and coordinating those two things. But I don't.
So it doesn't add months to the development process?
No, because it's tied in with the building permit and the certificate. You apply for the program. When you apply for a building permit, you are eligible once you've had your final inspection and you have a certificate of occupancy.
Thank you. I didn't mean to sidetrack, but I just didn't understand.
So minutes, not months.
Yeah, it doesn't add anything to your ability to occupy your building or any additional regulation, but sometimes we wonder whether people are truly aware of that incentive out there and how it works. I mean, I do know, the only development I know of that consciously made a decision to invest in North Salina as opposed to elsewhere is the senior housing that's now called Residence 600. They are aware of the tax rebate. They calculated that into all their pro formas, and they took a $12,000 vacant lot and put a $3.2 million building on it, and they paid the first 5 years. Their property tax was the same as if they had a $12,000 lot.
I apologize for the follow-up question, but you talk about developers and developments, and that sounds like something big and huge and somebody that's really fancy and smart. Let's say that I'm Joe Q. Public and I'm driving down Ash Street and I see a vacant lot and I'm wanting to build a house. Can I, as an individual citizen, go through that same process that a developer goes through to get that kind of incentive?
Our biggest customer or user of the neighborhood tax rebate for residential is Habitat for Humanity. They have built more houses that have taken advantage of the tax rebate than any other organization or individual. And so anybody who's a home builder or just an individual lot owner that wants to take a vacant lot or in the North Salina area and put a new dwelling on it, they are going to be eligible for the program. And if you have an existing building or a vacant space downtown, you are eligible on the commercial side.
Dean, now, that's not just for new construction, that's also for renovations and remodels as well, is that correct?
That is correct. I was working with someone, and we talked about it in the housing study just a little bit. There's a property at 227 South 11th. There's an existing dwelling. The beginning value on that house was $62,000. The county appraiser, when we took it back to them, and this was under the same ownership, they came back and had a value after all the work had been done in the house and raised it to $75,000. I met the new owner this week, and they said, but I just paid $120,000 for the house, and it appraised, and I got a loan. So I'm going to go back and talk to the county appraiser and ask why it was only valued at 75 when it was just purchased for 120. But what that does show is that in the market, not necessarily from the county appraiser, but in the market, you can take a $62,000 dwelling on South 11th and turn it into a $120,000 dwelling, and that is eligible for a partial rebate.
Dean, one thing I may want to make sure on that, I remember when I got mine isn't there a big rule on there that it has to be done before the permit is issued?
Well, you have to file the application within 60 days after your building permit is issued.
Yeah, they're very sticky.
Well, now, do you find, do you generally find that when those applications are being made, they're being made by the homeowner or by the contractor?
Usually by the owner. What we have tried various methods, including attaching the brochure to the building permit when it's issued. We learn from that sometimes we give it to the contractor and then they don't share it with the owner. So it gets back to the education side along with the incentives. We're doing the best we can to make people aware of incentives, but we're certainly open to ideas for how to make those incentives more available or more aware. But we wanted to make everyone understand that there are incentives out there, and we're certainly open to ideas about new incentives.
Thank you, Dean. Let's still continue now because I think there may be some beyond what we currently do. Has somebody heard of? Does somebody think there's a better way? Are there questions about the incentives we are giving right now beyond what we just discussed?
We've discussed changing the value. Sometimes we worry that I think what's at $10,000 or something has to be changed in the house, though it is.
Has to be an increase of $10,000 for a house or $20,000 for commercial.
Yeah, and we wondered if maybe lowering the amount, but I think it really boils down, we discovered, just more about education for people, and the contractors too, letting them know that, this is important to the home buyer. And especially for marketing those houses. If you have somebody who's going up there like a Bixby, I don't know if he's all doing apartments, or if he's making any to resell, think about what the value that is for a home buyer. $100,000 house might have, what, $1,500 taxes or something? I don't know.
Well, I'm looking at Todd out there just because I know his face. And maybe he can tell me, and the rest of you can as well. So you've applied for this tax credit and renovated and updated and improved this home. And I don't know what the lifespan for homeowners are, but I'm going to think that it's probably a lot less than 10 years.
First-time buyers, 12 years on the average.
Okay, but let's say that in 4 years you get transferred someplace else.
2014 Home Builders Association report.
Right. But if the people whose house I'm about to buy get transferred and it has tax credits on it, will that automatically flow to me as a new owner? Or does that start all over again? Okay? That was just, I mean, I wasn't meaning to make it sound accusatory. I was just curious because it stays year by year.
That's right.
Okay.
So if you're a home buyer and you move into that house and it's a $5,000 lot, and you think about $1,500 over 5 years, I mean, you just save yourself $8,000 or $9,000, $10,000, whatever the guy has.
But the second owner, if there is a second owner, can also benefit from that. Good.
Absolutely.
Other, yes, Randall.
What's the east-west boundary for this area? Or north-south boundary?
For residential, it basically extends from Broadway to Ohio, anywhere north of Iron or State Street. And then the commercial aspect of that runs up Santa Fe, up Pacific, and then down the Broadway corridor for commercial. And we've also expanded it into the western part of the community, so a good part of the southwest and western part of Salina is also covered on the residential side.
I was just curious about maybe expanding that as the homes age and could benefit by, renovation, that kind of thing.
Well, it is highly underutilized for the geographic area that it covers, and so that's.
And I think that there is probably an issue. People, homeowner, Joe Rogan,
And Jerry, probably the biggest advantage of it is, and the reason the city offers these things is because we realize that it's cheaper for the city as a citywide. We already have infrastructure there. We have streets there. It's already better. So not only are we offering the savings on the taxes, we're offering them a savings by not increasing the taxes because, as you know, roads are a very important thing to the citizens of Salina. We can't even take care of the roads we have. It's very difficult to take care of the new roads that we're building as well as the ones we have without any population. More streets, same population, everybody taxes go up. It's real simple. So that's why we want to incentivize that, because we realize the importance of utilizing areas of town we already have.
Well, and the interesting thing is that McMahon was talking about the one thing that determines value as much as anything else is, I want to use the realtor, location, 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 or the view, if you will. And I think that's one of the things that, as a community, we still need to be real sensitive to. If we're going to encourage somebody, if I'm going to, using Dean's example, buy the lot for $5,100 on Ash Street and put a $75,000 house there, what am I looking at?
Established trees,
Yeah, bing, one. Okay, but those are the things that we need to have people begin to understand, because people only have so many dollars to spend, and they want to have what they consider in their mind's eye to be a good view, if you will, or a location.
proximity to parks.
Yep.
Where are the Baltimore parks? Central and northern Salina.
I would, one question on incentives that I have, and this is more a question if there is available in the city or the state, would be incentives for energy conservation or incentives for the use of alternative energy. Do we have those kinds of incentives in our city? And are we utilizing any that are available nationally or statewide, would be my question.
I don't know, but that's one thing that I think would be good to begin to at least let people know what is or is not there. I built my first 2 solar panels with a tax credit back in '80 and put them on my house, and I would have never done it if I hadn't gotten the incentive to do that. So it's an interesting point.
Be
Yes.
interesting to get a feel from the room as we're talking about incentives, if there's a feeling that the city offering financing to build infrastructure for greenfield development is an incentive, or what the general feeling of that is an incentive. Anybody? We got builders here, developers. Is a special assistance financing an incentive? I'll answer it.
Right back. Go ahead.
Well, as a developer, I think it's an incentive, because the bottom line is that it lowers the eventual homeowner's cost of living. If I borrow at 6% and the city's capable of borrowing at 3%, 3% difference, that's probably going to end up in out of a homeowner's pocket.
I think I appreciate that you feel like it is in a sense, and that's really all, that's all I was asking, so appreciate that. Anybody else?
Well, I think people will be willing to pay for the infill development issue from there is, it's got to start from somewhere so that people will see that something's happening. I would rather see the money that the city is going to subsidize for something to start with somewhere. I've always been in Salina, Kansas, when we say, why do you live here? I mean, the work for me is opportunity, where I may not be able to anywhere else, but I'm still amazed at the people that I recruit to this community. They still say, where do the people go on Saturday morning to hang out in the community? And I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I don't have an answer. Good point, or somewhere for those guys to go to fill the community. You know, and back when I worked at Anderson Leather, I mean, I was on the downtown board with the wardens and Chuck Carroll and those, and I was the guy who wanted to shut down Santa Fe from Iron Street to Ash Street, you know, and have little curves to figure out, and they said, oh, that'll never happen, and we love the storefronts, and the people pull up here, and the old people won't get out and walk that far, but I had this grand envision of a big fountain there, and that's back when Shooter's Roof was there, and all this stuff, and people just want to have a place to come down and sit at tables and chairs and have a form of community. And until that starts, it's like that can start somewhere and then work its way out. So as a builder developer and as a guy putting money into downtown, and Brian's here putting more than, it's got to start somewhere so that we can come down and feel like, okay, that's great.
It starts with us, though.
Right, I appreciate that, and I agree with it 100%. I think the value of having that video presentation before us is that one of the themes in there is that we have a shared vision and we work towards that. And it's like, do you want the decisions we need to make? It's not about the money first, as he said. It's like, what do we do? And so we have to make that fundamental decision in a community our size. Do we invest downtown or do we invest out on the strip? And so there are some of those things, and I like the discussion about incentives because it does, for me anyway, what concerns me is that are we disincentivizing something like downtown by incentivizing something else? Are we making something else so much easier to do that nobody wants to take a risk on doing something that's a little bit more difficult? And so I think it's a balancing act, and I think that's why we're all here to
John, I agree.
flesh some of these out. So,
and I agree, and I think from reading some of the information, he did make the comment that there's a balancing act, that, you needed both, and I think that's what we have to find. I use the example, if you have two new doctors come to town and one has a family versus one that's single, they have a completely different mindset as to what they see themselves living in. And I think we have to be able to reach it to both of those sectors.
Well, I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but I think that the way we look at it is there's been 30 years of that other kind of growth, the single doctor or family doctor, one or the other. It's time that we looked at the other doctor for a while, and that's our point. I think with 490 buildable lots out there, we got that pretty well covered.
First of all, I'm not sure there's 490. That's another.
Maybe we built 5 houses, that might be 45.
Right under the clock. Go ahead. You're under the clock.
I think when I read when Salina Journal was doing flashbacks, I think in 1942 was when the first downtown revitalization funding was given to downtown Salina. Sorry.
You're fine.
What does this group of city commissioners feel they're going to do different? And we've seen it throughout history, money being given to downtown. Since I've lived here, 15 years now, it's downtown. Even the comprehensive plan says that special attention needs to be shown to South Salina and East Salina because that's where the anticipated growth is due to the floodplain. And I keep hearing about strip mall, the strip in Salina. I haven't seen the strip in Salina except for maybe up on the very far north end. But what do they see? How do they weigh these two? And again, throughout history, we've been throwing money at downtown, not throwing it at it, but giving it to them. What makes us believe that we're going to change it this time?
Well, I think, first off, the amount of incentives is totally different. I think Kohl's received $3.3 million in incentive to build out there, which I disagree with. I wasn't on the commission then. But I have to ask people before me, has as a city, ever gone out and just spent $3.3 million on downtown in recent years? No. It's the amount of incentives. How much it costs. I mean, I think when you look at what's the full light thing, that's about the first project we've done in how many years down there, any consequence. Yeah, but the concept is you want to have, I mean, look, the light thing is real simple. The lights are more efficient now. They'll actually pay for themselves in 20-some years versus if we kept the other ones, we'd be in the hole. So at some point, you have to fix up infrastructure. But other than that, I don't know that we've spent a lot of money. It's the amounts of money that we spent downtown. That 3.3 is one project opposed to infrastructure, roads, everything you keep building down south is way more than downtown Salina's ever received.
Well, I think, go ahead, please. No, I sense you. Well, and I think the thing we need to not do is not focus on those things. Let's use Kohl's as an example. When Kohl's came to town, I don't think we had a mindset or an idea that we might be able to lure, if I can use that word, Kohl's to a downtown setting. I just, most of us thought, well, there's just not enough room in downtown. We'd have to tear down a whole city block to put one store in there. And I think we're beginning to get an idea that there is, and we need to have those conversations with people that move in, coupled with the idea that we need to I spent a lot of time as a kid growing up looking down at the ground, and my dad was a wonderful person, but he didn't want us to be too prideful in our family. And I think that's Kansas as a group. And I think there has to be a time when, as a city, we hold our chin up and look at developers, outside developers, or any group that's coming in to do a project, and not be so worried that they're going to take their project down the road to the next big bump in the road and do it there. And I think that will get us a much better deal so that we can address the issues of a more equitable development. Sorry, went way off on that, and I apologize. That's not my job. Carl hasn't spoken all. I'm going to let Carl first because he hasn't said a word.
We're on the subject of incentives here, and I'm going to direct this at Dean. I'm wondering what other incentives are out there that we don't currently use. Mr. McMahon mentioned the redesign of storefronts, and that was successful somewhere, just doing it one effort at a time. What else could we have out there? And to the group, is there the political will to create some kind of granting problem? Can we make a commitment as a community to a dollar figure for whatever vision we have going forward to help to incentivize these things? We can't depend on the state and federal government to come up with the money for these things, and it's going to have to be good local people that promote and develop these projects because their political will to help incentivize these things. What would be
I'll get my junk off the counter.
That was a long question. I'll do my best. Jason Gage, City Manager. I figured I didn't want that one. I thought I'd take that for him. Most of your incentives are set up by state enabling legislation, but we have the ability to give away every city property tax dollar or sales tax dollar that we want to. You can create a lot of ways to do that. I think. When we talk about that, I can tell you we have CIDs, TDDs, TIFs, property tax abatements, IRBs. I mean, there's all kinds of Bs and Rs and everything else out there. So we can figure out a way to give away all the tax dollars if we want to really do that. And so I think the biggest thing is the first question is this whole idea of if we're going to do that, which we do. We actually have pretty aggressive incentives right now, and we don't try to throw millions and millions of dollars at anybody who just wants to come in and in essence buy a business or buy the investment. We're not going to do that because I don't think that's a good, I think our governing body would agree that's not a good practice. We've never had a governing body that's wanted to do that. But we have the ability to craft about any incentive that we'd really think that we need to have. I think the key question comes back to where do we see our community today? What do we see for it in the future? How effective is an incentive to help make that happen? What else needs to happen to get it there and see where it all fits? I think we have the potential to do whatever we'd like to do.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned, which I think is important, maybe addresses this much of Carl's question, but it's the facade grants.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. The city provides dollars to Salina Downtown Inc., and they have a great program put together to incentivize investment in facades downtown. So that's a very good point. Brian's very near and dear to that, being on the SDI board. But they do a great job with it, so that way we leverage our partners. We don't always have to administer anything, but we do the program, but we do offer that. So yeah, and there's the question about downtown before. There has been a lot of attention towards downtown and little pieces and things, but quite honestly, I've always told people, I said taxes are all fine, but if you're way too high, you can run a business out. If you're way too low, you can think you're going to get anything. But the fact of the matter is in Ellsworth, they're giving away property. How many of you are going to move to Ellsworth? It's a nice little town, but I don't see everybody raising their hand saying, I'm ready to go there. So there's a point you got to be in the middle, take care of your services, and then create an environment for what you want to have. And that's the hardest part to get agreement on, because there are lots of opinions and perspectives, and we just have to figure out strategically what's our best option.
This is why you're there. I really don't know, so I'm asking this. What incentives does the city have, any city, us or others, to encourage businesses to pay a living wage?
We don't offer any incentive related to the wage of a business. I mean, at Salina historically and today, from that perspective, is what I would probably call a free market community. Totally, we just don't get involved in that and haven't. And to my knowledge, since I've been here, it hasn't been discussed or debated.
Do you have the quality job criteria that
Yeah, that's a good point. Mike offers a good point. A few years ago, when we started looking at incentives for primarily, I say primarily industrial development, it can apply into other things. We said we do need to try to grow wages, because quite honestly, if you don't have jobs that provide adequate wages, you're not going to have investment regardless of what your taxes are. And so what we've said is we have what we call a quality wage level and a premier wage level for that. And we kind of tag off of the state and some of the things that they do. And so what we've said is that if you meet the quality, you qualify for some basic incentives. If you meet a premier level, we'll try to be more aggressive, try to make sure and bring the jobs here.
As a teacher, we're never going to get done. I'm going to move us to number 4 and kind of have you fantasize with me for a minute that we've got 10 developments. Actually, Salina has more than that right now on the burner, but 10 developments that we're going to fund or begin to initiate. What is it that we should be looking at to try to differentiate which one of those developments percolates to the top? I know one thing, there isn't a finite amount of money, so we can't do them all well, probably. So talk among yourselves or think out loud, how do we decide which developments are the ones that we spend our cash on?
Well, I would say that probably the biggest thing would be the development of downtown, more development of downtown, because that is the heart of the city.
Right.
And when you bring people into the city, they want to see Salina downtown. They want to see that's where they get their good feeling, their negative feeling. And I personally think that we ought to widen the VIB to north of Elm and go beyond the boundaries and start developing that area. Because, we're kind of landlocked downtown.
All right. Go ahead, please. All right, I'll come back to you because there's good ideas cooking there, I can tell.
What are the developments you're talking about?
Well, I think he was thinking, in my mind, you were thinking about a more of a umbrella development of downtown. I guess I was thinking about a little, and have no reason to think that way. I'm just thinking about what I would consider smaller development pieces, i.e., bike, hike paths, the Lee building. Is that an important enough development that the city should get involved with that? Those kinds of projects were the ones that I was thinking about. A development project could be even though it's a capital improvement project, but there could be some push that says one of the big development projects could be is that we need to be sure that the infrastructure in our town is second to none. Meaning the streets and the sidewalks and lights and so forth. So that's what I was thinking about. But and so I assume there's a lot more of those than we could ever fund. Now wait, she'll forget. I'm not going to let. I'll come right back. I promise I will. Go ahead.
No, I'm wondering if it's a chicken and egg problem. You need
Probably.
an investor who has an idea who wants to consider coming. We aren't in a position really proactively to promote what we need. I'd love to see some good restaurants, really first-class restaurants. But that's a dicey project in a town like this. And, you know, the people who would make a living from it, or who knows? How do you go about setting priorities when you don't have takers, you know, people who are willing to invest to put their business here? Once they come, yes, we should be able to divert them to help them and so on, but you can't just attract them out of.
And I think he talks about that being laser. I think he used the word laser versus shotgun, and I don't know what it is. And I think at some point, if I'm going to if I'm on the verge of extinction, I'm going to take the shotgun approach, and whatever I kill, I'm going to drag home. And I don't think Salina is near to that stage at all. And so I think we do have to come to grips with the idea is, and I'm going to use the word fine dining, and I butchered what you were trying to say. Is fine dining one of those things that we really want to put, you know, a lot of initial efforts into? I don't know. There's got to be other things that people are thinking in terms of development.
I think she said a very good point, and I think what happens is as long as Olive Garden opening in Salina's front page news, we have an issue. When that's the best that we can come up with, that's disturbing. Nothing against Olive Garden. We're glad to hear that they spent their own money. We didn't give them an incentive on top of all the other ones that we had. But people have to realize they need to look at it financially. We need to teach people, look, for every dollar you spend at a local restaurant, over 2 times if it stays in your community. When it's a chain restaurant, it's like 14 cents. I think it's like 48 cents for a local restaurant, 14 for a chain. Listen, we're glad the chains are here. They want to come and make put their sign in the yard. Great, we love to have them. But I don't think we incentivize that. I don't think we necessarily go out and go searching for them. What we do is we try and prop up the local guys. I know that I know several places downtown are trying to basically build up opportunities for restaurants to go into them. We need to exploit those and encourage people to do that. And let the people Salina know it's better if you eat at those places. It's better if you shop at these local stores because more of that money stays in your community. It's a community commitment.
Okay. Wally, you've been real quiet. Go ahead. Yeah.
The modus is going to get the southern deal. And nothing has ever been brought up to Lauren about any kind of incentive for her to go in there. She's coming into Salina out of Nashville, Tennessee. She's been running a restaurant back there. Obviously quite successful at it. She comes up with pretty good money. She's put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. She's completely redoing the inside of that restaurant. She's repainting the new light fixture on the outside. And fortunately, all the picture reference there, so we don't mess with that. But she's going to open in May, which is going to be kind of exciting. One thing, she's going to have gumbo and southern, catfish and stuff like that. I got excited about gumbo. But anyway, then we had it here the other day. Had a guy coming in from Europe who wanted to open another restaurant in Salina, in one of the properties that I have available. And it's interesting that people are looking, but real world. In fact, there's an article in my MSNBC on my computer this morning. The 10 restaurants that are not doing very good. Olive Garden, Applebee's, Denny's. It goes on down the list. They're all, people are tired of that canned food. They don't want them. And they're just going decreasing. I've been in commercial real estate for 39 cents a year. I put enough McDonald's and Wendy's around, I can tell you.
Right.
What's going to happen or won't happen. And we're seeing a lot of that right now.
And I agree. And it's somebody's talking about development, and we focused on food. The food industry is, and that is to me problematic. You know, in terms of if we could land a company several years ago that's already busy now making the blades for wind generators. You know, if we had a company like that in Salina, we wouldn't have to worry about whether or not we were going to attract restaurants. Because if they have 100 executives, 50 executives that are making $60,000, $70,000 a year or more, the restaurants will take care of themselves. They truly will. And so I think we need to, even though that's something that we can point to and it pulls people off the interstate. You know, I drove all the way to Galveston last week, and as much as I enjoy and appreciate and patronize local eateries in Salina, I won't stop at a local eatery in Corsicana, Texas. No offense if you grew up there, because I don't know what I'm going to get. And 20 miles down the road in my car, well, you know, I'm already giving you too much information. Yes.
You know, it still always goes back to education, engagement. You know, if the people in Salina or taxpayers are not engaged, you know, it don't make any difference if you're building on the south of the town, the north end of the town, or downtown. If they're not engaged, and a lot of them just don't seem they know what's going on. I mean, you know, they're clueless about what we're trying to do. I mean, you know, if they look at some of this stuff like, you know, the field house downtown. Well, what are the great deals we have where you get, you know, we're looking at, you know, taxpayer dollars, and we're also looking at, you know, private donations. I mean, that's big, but it's education.
You know, and the number of people who are in Salina and then their children grow up and go to school and migrate away. Many of them do migrate back. It's amazing how many do migrate back. But I think we and I'm not suggesting that the public schools get involved in doing something else, but I think there needs to be some opportunity for perhaps a group of people who, on a volunteer basis, can work with young people, youth, and so forth, and begin getting them involved in that process. Again, looking over here at our youth member to the Planning Commission is just an example. You know, kids need to appreciate things. Looking at Mr. Bingston over there, his children were involved somewhat with a project at Meadowlark School that took a little corner of the playground and turned it into an outdoor learning lab sponsored by the state of Kansas that was developed. And what they learned there about bugs and rocks and stuff like that was inconsequential. But what they learned is that it's a kind of important from time to time to take a little corner and make it special. And some of those kids are in banks here in Salina and in leadership positions here in Salina. And I hope that just a little bit of, wow, are we taking care of our green environment, enters into their thought process as they make decisions. So I couldn't agree with you more about the idea that we have to find a way to educate. Sometimes we tend to think of that as being something we have to do directly. But the best education I ever got was from my father. You know, and we don't do that very well anymore as people. We don't drag our kids off to work except for once a year when it's okay.
You know, Jerry, I was just kind of on that same point right there that you were talking about. I really think it would be a good idea for the community actually to use its universities in that way. That we actually would have, within the universities, we would have centers that would actually bring community members together as part of the student's classroom experience, to actually bring them together to get out some of this kind of information that he's talking about over there, to start doing some brainstorming on what we need to do. I think we could utilize our universities much better as a real connection to this kind of activity.
And the comprehensive plan calls for breaking us into neighborhoods and having that sort of thing. We haven't implemented that because it's more difficult than it would seem, but that is the direction we need to go in, is to have conversation centers like that.
We're winding down on the last 4 minutes, and we're not going to take time and get through all of those other things. I think, you know, in terms of cooperation with other agencies and community aesthetics and leaderships and committed citizens, maybe we can kind of wind up with strong leaders and committed citizens is probably a place we want to go. I belong to an organization called the Giraffe Project. I don't know if anybody else does or not, but their mantra is find the stories, tell the stories become the stories. And I think if we talk about an involved community or committed citizens, you've got to find those things that are good or unique or different. You've got to tell them, because some people don't know they're there. You know, some people, my wife can drive down the road and one day she'll say, when was that red barn put there? And we've driven by it for 10 years. And I love my wife. Please don't. She's going to kill me for that. But the point is that some of us are tuned in a little differently to things that are going on. And so we do have to be told those stories. And then the real challenge is if you want something different, do it. Be the story. Be the person that did the development, that spearheaded the effort. So are there other parting comments about this process, whether it's good, whether it's worth your 2 hours, or things that you heard in there that said, whoa, I never got a chance to say I really liked what he said. So if you wrote down something, this is your time for just open mic time. Anybody? Anything they heard in there?
Well, I'd like
Carl.
to thank you for moderating, Jerry, and we didn't get very far through this, so I'd be willing to come back and finish this.
Okay.
Wanted to have another step.
Yes.
I agree with Carl, because I think probably the most important one we didn't really do was number one, and that was kind of just get a refresher on the comprehensive plan, because I think one of the things that's critical, and it's great, everybody showed up, and yeah, thanks for moderating, but one of the things that I think is critical is that there are very few people in here that vote. I mean, this was 2010. Nobody on the city commission was here in 2010. Who was here? Who voted on the planning commission? Two of you guys. We only have two people here that actually voted to implement this plan, and yet we're the custodians of this plan. And so we need to do our best to implement this plan, which I think a big part of this is the implementation matrix. And I think any future joint study session ought to be about the implementation. And implementation means doing the best to fulfill a lot of the things, and there's policies in there that might need to be changed, and we've done some of that. And there's also follow-up plans and sub-area plans that need to be worked on as well. But a big part of it is to say, let's follow this plan as much as we can and not go in and change it, except where necessary. And so I think that's really merits a pretty long discussion, but I appreciate that both boards are here together and getting along and all that. So
Maybe taking a chunk of it. You know, it's a pretty daunting 300-page notebook, and to, you know, just to read it, but if you took a chunk of it, a chapter or a section of it, and really nitpick that, you know, and learned it inside out, I think would be good. Other things? Yes.
Thing that I'd like to leave her with this. There's a statement I learned a long time ago that said, when you knew it, you knew, you did what you did, and you got what you got. And now that you know differently, what are you going to do, you know, to get what you want? And I feel that coming from the leaders who were elected by that. But I still, as much as my heart's in downtown and was there when I moved to town, please don't make this as we're moving forward. Don't blame the forefathers. Don't blame the people who put together the other plans, and don't blame the people who chose to invest in South Salina. I agree that you can bring that back to the core, but please contain some of your comments of that strips are bad, what was done out south was bad, and that the people who chose to come into our community, who may take money outside of our community, it's still okay that they're here. And that's the one thing that I would like to, as this moves forward, that's the one thing I'd like to leave.
Good point. Good point. We want the last.
I also think we need to work a lot harder on getting people on our boards and commissions, because when I looked at that list the last time, there was an awful lot of boards and commissions that weren't full. And so I don't know if that's just apathy on the part of the public. I suppose part of it is, but part of it might be just that we're not getting the information out to the people that we need to be on boards and commissions, so they understand the process. Most people don't understand the process, don't have any idea what we're doing.
But see, that's, I think, from my perspective, I've been in Salina forever, but I didn't get started on any board or commission until a couple of years ago. And I really thought that I didn't have anything to offer. And I don't think that anyone said that, but I think as an organization, we have to be very careful that we don't send that message. My biggest frustration working at the last school I did for 12 years is that I couldn't get enough of the parents that came into that school to realize that they had something to offer. No, they didn't have $75,000. No, they didn't have 2 cars in their garage. No, but they had invaluable things to offer. And I think somehow the trick to getting people involved is to let them know that whatever they bring to the table is invaluable. And what all of you bring to the table will make Salina a great place long after I'm done living here, I'm sure. Ian, you want to finish that up? Cool.
I just wanted to mention as a follow-up, the Planning Commission is going to have their annual review of the comprehensive plan and a public hearing on Thursday, March 12th. And so the sole agenda item on that meeting will be a review of the implementation matrix and the comprehensive plan. And that it's going to occur in a special meeting on Thursday, March 12th. That will be at 4 o'clock. But it is a public hearing, and any comments or input is welcome.
Okay. I think we're done. Again, thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm side of the room for being visiting for everything else. So thank you.